This is Test Case Scenario with me, your host, Jason Baum. This podcast is the definitive hub for knowledge and stories in the software testing and development communities. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button and let's dive straight into the episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Test Case Scenario. I am your host, Jason Baum, and with me, as always, my co-host, Marcus Merrell. Marcus, welcome back. Another week.
Thanks. Great to be here as usual.
I feel like we just did this, don't you?
Yeah, Thursday to Tuesday. It's a couple days.
Thursday to Tuesday. We're not supposed to say when we're recording. No, that's okay. Is this a surprise to anybody that we record? I think we shared this in the past. We record these episodes, and you're listening to them in the future. It's kind of like when I travel back from Australia, and I leave at 11 o'clock a.m. and I get back at 10 o'clock a.m. on the same day. And have you ever done that before?
Not Australia, but I mean, I'm certainly mystified more than I care to admit by time zones in general.
I once traveled to an island in Fiji that is literally the international date line goes through it. So you can stand in today and in tomorrow at the same time. And now that just ruins the concept of time forever for you.
Until you realize that it's a false construct.
It's a completely false construct. Go by the waves, Marcus. High tide, low tide, that's all that matters. And we will live a happier life. Okay, you didn't tune in to hear us wax poetic about time zones and time theory and whatever else. We're talking waves. Today, we want to talk about alert fatigue, signal fatigue. It's something that's a common problem. We have been seeing the deterioration of quality over time, just in general. We've talked about it on this podcast. We talked about shift left being dead. Now we're going to kind of talk about something very specific, signal fatigue. And Marcus, I wonder if you could start us off by just talking about what is signal fatigue, like what are the signals we're talking about, and then we can go a little deeper. How's that?
Yeah, I mean, to me, in general, it means like the world around you. I wore an Apple Watch the first year they came out, and I stopped wearing it because of signal fatigue, because it would buzz every few minutes. I would get a bid on something on eBay. I would see a tweet that mentioned me. I would receive a text. And so I started eliminating the notifications one by one. And in the end, the only thing the watch was doing for me, it never beeped, it never rattled. The only thing it did for me is when I would look at it, it would tell me the conference room that my next meeting was in. This is back when we were in offices. And alert fatigue killed me. I've recently gone through an exercise shutting down notifications for very nearly every single application on my phone or Mac, including Slack and email. I don't get push notifications for anything because I want only Signal when I pull for it. You extrapolate that out to large teams of people and the productivity interruptions that they experience on a daily basis. I can see where it would interrupt a lot of processes.
You are a very smart man. I wish I've done that. It really does get in the way of things. I think the way we're programmed, right, is like, at least the way I'm programmed. I don't know if everybody's programmed the same way as me. Probably not. But like, all right, I'm going upstairs and I'm going to grab something and I have the intention. That's what I'm going to go do. And then an alert comes in on my phone or my watch and I read it and I'm like, oh, I forgot to do that. Now I got to go water the lawn because the alert for the lawn thing came off. So I start walking away from the thing I intended to go do. And then I go do the lawn and I'm like, well, what was it that I was going to do? And it's completely gone because of the signal, for one thing, distracted me from the thing I had intended to go do. And is that a good example of kind of what's happening on a day-to-day basis with software development and the testing of software?
I mean, I think so. Like, we spent the 90s and 2000s building logging into software, and we've spent the 2010s and 20s using VC-backed, VC-funded APM and logging startups like Sumo Logic and Splunk and great companies. Their products very much need to exist, but like They exist because they're there to help us make sense of logs and pull signal out of noise. We're at this point where we have too much data and we don't really have a good, easy way of figuring out what's important to pay attention to. I think that really informs the testing conversation is that I routinely speak to people at conferences and in the industry who have huge numbers of automated tests that they're running and huge failure rates within those tests. So they have 1,000 tests every night, 300 of them fail. And what do you do with the failures? Well, I mean, we're trying to get that number down. And it's like, well, how do you know what you're testing, man? Just too many alerts, too much noise.
Too much noise. That's the thing. If everything is a red alert, how are you supposed to sift through the noise? How do you? Yeah. You can't. It's basic communication, right? It's if there's noise, it's going to disrupt, and you're not going to be able to get the message across. Mm-hmm. We had Titus Fortner on several months ago, and then we re-aired the episode recently, parts of it anyway, like in a best of package, and then we put out a short. So be sure to look at it. But he basically talked about like you wouldn't ignore the red alert button on a nuclear submarine. Right. But developers like are constantly forced to wear dual hats and then start to neglect the onslaught of like urgent alert. Everything's a red alert. And that's literally sinking quality, to keep the analogy going.
Yeah, exactly. I was on site with someone not too long ago, like sort of observing their operations and how they operate. And they had this really, really nice set of dashboards all around the office. Big TV screens that would show sort of the state of in this case, it was their data center. And there was one particular graph that was hexagons that were broken up into smaller hexagons, which were broken up into smaller hexagons. So it was like one graph would represent like 140 database instances. And one of them was red. One of the tiny, tiny little dots was red. And I asked someone, like, what would you do if one of those dots turned red? And he was like, oh, we would freak out. That was a really bad thing. That means that database is not persisting information the way it's supposed to. And I'm like, well, that one over there is red. And he was like, oh, squinted his eyes, stood up, got closer to it. Oh, that's red. Oh, shoot, we should do something about that. Like, why isn't the whole screen red? Why is that screen ever doing anything except being green or red? Because I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of glanceable information, not just glanceable, but like audible. I heard about a team once who had a pattern of white noise in the office that was basically just crickets, very nice, dull cricket sound that would just go. And when something went wrong with the site, the crickets would stop and everyone noticed.
Oh, wow.
Everyone just stood up and paid it. Like, oh, something's going on. It's fantastic because it's passive. You don't know that you're processing information and then suddenly it just hits you. And I think that's the kind of thing that we love to show. Hey, look at all this data I've got, when we should be showing, look at the thing you need to know right now. That's what we should be heading towards. And I think that we kind of lose sight of that sometimes.
Totally. And they fix this. I feel like they're fixing some of these solutions. I was driving the other day. I was looking for a parking spot in my town. We have parking meters on like some main areas, and I was pulling in. I didn't even notice this before, but like a couple of parking meters were up, and from the road side, they were flashing this giant strobe, and it was red and then white, and like it was just going. Like, they've solved the problem, because like before, the parking meter had to get out, check the parking meter, did the red on the other side of the meter turn red? Yeah. It's like, it didn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
Now that's a good signal alert, I would imagine, for them, less work.
When I parked at Whole Foods Market in Austin, back when I lived in Austin, they would tell you how many parking spots are available per floor. And when you drive up and down the rows, there's green or the lights out. And I thought that's amazing to be able to just glance side to side. And that's the key thing that I really think people have to take note of. It's not just for me, the person driving in the car. It's for Whole Foods to manage traffic in and out of their space. They don't want a whole bunch of cars driving around really, really slowly, checking and hitting the brakes and getting hopeful and then getting their hopes dashed. Like, it causes clutter and it gunks up the works of the parking garage. So this is to help them, probably more than it is to help you, but it sure does help you. So I'm always in for these win-win situations of how can we do less work and help the customer also?
Yeah.
Like, that's what we ought to be heading towards.
Yeah. And I mean, that is the dilemma, I think, that we're all faced with, right? Developers, especially, to bring it back. It's like, do I meet production quota or deadline, or do I meet production quality requirements? And it's like, why do we have to compromise one for the other? And a lot of it does. I mean, we already know how I feel about the concept of shift left testing. I know how you feel about shift left testing, but this is where it's like it goes back to, I don't know, I'll think of like writing a document, right? If we're writing a document and are you the best proofreader of your own document, or is someone else who then reviews your document the better proofreader, right? We already have this idea of how we want it to go.
There's science behind that. I mean, yeah, for sure.
What there is? What's the science? I'd love to hear it.
Science about objectivity and proofreading. I mean, if you have two people who are moderately equal skill in writing and proofreading, then like, yeah, I know that someone told me this back when I was trying to write professionally, that it's a thing. I'm sure there's science behind it. But yeah, I can't cite a source for you.
Yeah. No, I mean, even to keep that going, like, I don't know about you, but like I use a tool that tracks what I'm writing and like gives me correction advice and like grammar advice and all that stuff. We don't have to say what specific tool it is. You can probably guess. There's a few of them out there. Anyway, so I use the tool, and when the red alert starts coming up and it hits in like the 30s or the 40s, when I'm not ignoring, like when I write, I just write and I ignore everything, and then I go back and I proofread and edit and all that stuff. Sometimes it can get up there if I'm just like totally sloppy. And when it gets up there, I close it. So there you go. I'm ignoring the red alert.
Well, you know, it's funny. There was a bit of an unspecific news event that happened this weekend where I was constantly getting alerts from New York Times. And the drip of information was so slow and so inadequate and so trivial. And I thought, at some point, I was just like, I'm not going to read these. I'm not going to respond to them. And I turned off the radio. Just like, I'm going to check in 24 hours and see if anything major has happened, because every new piece of information is like, oh, there's a person who did a crime. We now know their middle name. That will never affect my life ever in the future at any point. Does not matter. And then the next breaking news is, we believe there's another thing about this that's important. It's like, we believe, so it's not a fact. Okay, shut it down. Like, I do not care about your speculation. You know, I want signal.
You know, you joke about the middle name and like you'll never remember it, but Lee Harvey Oswald, like I'll start naming middle names. You'd be surprised. Mark David Chapman.
If you said something blah blah blah, if you said Mark Chapman and Lee Oswald, I would not feel like I needed the middle name.
Yeah, probably would. I don't know why we include the middle name, but I do know their
John
middle
Wilkes
names.
Booth.
Yeah, exactly. I don't remember my dad's middle name sometimes, but I remember their middle names really well.
My father and I share a middle name, so I got.
Do you really? Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's like a piece of trivia for. We'll have to include that in the after episode. Maybe you'll win something if you remember Marcus's middle name. What's your middle name?
It is Ralph. I try to pronounce it Rafe when I remember to. But it is also not the answer to any of my security questions, so don't.
No, yeah, please. Jeez. Okay. Shut that down.
Yeah.
But like all these red alerts and signal fatigue and red alert, basically ignoring it, you know, we're compromising quality control, right? And we're putting software quality at risk. And we see those results. And there was a customer experience survey that was done. And it basically said that CX has hit an all-time low, with an unprecedented 39% of brands significantly declining in CX scores in 2024. And while users are unfortunately all too used to disappointing software, you know, there's some serious ramifications. More than half of consumers, 57%, would consider switching to a competitor after just 3 to 4 negative interactions with a company's website, software, or mobile app.
I think that's generous. I think it's 1 or 2. I mean, that Amazon cart checkout flow always works. Like always works. There's a reason, because that's probably the thing that they spend the most amount of their time testing, to make sure that your core business can still generate revenue, even if other things might not be working.
Yeah. So a path forward, like
Sure.
where, because we just basically bitched for 15 minutes.
Right.
Well, I guess if you tuned into the show, that's kind of what we do. No, just kidding. We don't just complain, but this is a serious issue, and it's almost like a catch-22 a bit of the situation we're in, where kind of developers are faced. It's like they shift left, take on testing. Cool. Oh, by the way, you got to do this. Oh, by the way, you got to do that. Oh, by the way, you got to do this. So they're overloaded, and they're, they have to ignore due to the fact that, how can you pay attention to all those signals, right, Marcus?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what is the answer? Where do we go from here?
Well, I think the answer might be different for individuals versus companies. And if we stick to the field of testing and software, first of all, I'll say as an individual, as a consumer, the way I did it was I looked through every single app in my iPhone notification thing. And I said to myself, am I going to stop what I'm doing as a result of anything this app can ever tell me? Like I kind of look at the weather all the time. I want to know, but I also, do I want it to tell me if there's a heat advisory? Absolutely not. I do not want it to tell me that. Is there anything this app can tell me that's going to make me stop and react to it? And the answer was a real honest no to all but like 3 apps. I think that you can apply the same thing to testing. If you're automating a test case, ask yourself, are we going to stop the shipment of this software if this test fails? And the answer is yeah. You put it in sort of a priority 0 mode where you get a red alert, and it only is a red alert if the test fails. And it's only going to fail if there's actually a problem and you've engineered that test not to be flaky or brittle. Now, I do believe that you should run more tests than just priority 0. It's just that the alerting on those tests does not belong in the same category. It's yellow, not red, or it's something like that. But still, you need to ask yourself, what is the action I'm going to take if this thing fails? Because if there is no action that anyone's going to take if it fails, that test is doing you 0 good. And you're actually not being truthful to your management about what you're testing, because you are testing it, but if no action is taken on the results, it didn't actually matter that you tested it. So you're not covering that functionality. So take a real hard look and don't be afraid to delete code. That's what I would say.
And how about this? You can't continue to gut QA teams anymore and continue to place the burden on developers' shoulders. It cannot be a one-way street. This is quality control and quality assurance exists for a reason, and we can't forget that and eliminate something that is so important.
Great point. And I would just add one more thing, which is, I believe, I don't know if the data is going to bear itself out or if they went this deep on the topic in that Gartner report, but I believe that the root of the 39% customer experience issues you're talking about, people will probably say it's generational. Kids these days don't have brand loyalty. I don't know that I believe that. I think it is that kids these days have very high standards for how they want to interact with the brand.
Yep.
And that the things that will drive someone away from your brand are functional software issues, not things like it's slow or the site was down for half an hour or something was misconfigured and the site's broken. Those kinds of things make headlines, and they're really big news when they happen, but they're fairly rare, all things considered. One company might have an event like that every 6 or 7 years if they're a decent company. So that's not really going to drive people away from your brand. It's just going to generate a lot of dramatic headlines. It's like the difference between a plane crash and a car crash.
Right.
Plane crashes make headlines, but they don't happen very often at all. Car crashes don't make headlines, yet so many more people die every year from car crashes. And I think that is the kind of thing that erodes the brand. And it's a slow drip, death of 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, very good point. Well, there's our advice to the industry. I hope you'll take it for what it's worth. And I'm sure this is something we're just going to keep talking about. At least from our side, we're going to push quality for obvious reasons, but also because we feel it, we mean it. Like, this is authentic. We wouldn't be preaching if we didn't believe it so much. And
my whole career, man.
Yeah, take from it what you will, and we hope that the industry will, and we start seeing some improvement on the quality side. The customers are speaking. They're speaking for themselves. It's time we listen. And if it hasn't hit you in the pocket the businesses. It will. This type of brand equity takes time to build. And you're going to see it slowly declining over time. Maybe not even that slow. And then it will eventually hit you in the pocket. So I would just warn brands on that last note. All right, we did it. 20 minutes, Marcus. This was a good conversation. Thank you so much, Marcus, and thank you, our listeners. We really appreciate the time that you give us. It's the most valuable thing that you could possibly give us, and we hope to see you again next week for another episode of Test Case Scenario. Thank you for joining us on Test Case Scenario. Share your thoughts in the comments. We'll make sure to respond to each and every single one. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to keep in touch. If you missed our last episode, it's popping up on your screen right now. Go, click it. Until next time on Test Case Scenario.